Lady Edward Mungu. Our guest today is Dr. Audrin Mathe, the Executive Director in the Ministry of Information and Communication Technologies. Dr. Mathe, welcome to the show.
Thank you so very much.
Yeah. Now, Dr. Mathe, when you first joined the ministry, I mean, among the things that you did first was to really do the regional visits, just to touch base. And what did you pick up during those visits?
I think one was just to familiarize myself with what the ministry looks like from inside out. So to see, to assess the kind of environment that we have, the kind of the equipment that we have in the region, so that we are able to communicate much more effectively. Obviously, I found that in some cases we don't have proper offices in about maybe five regions. Obviously, we've constructed others in some of the regions. So the difficulty of that is that we are now not able to do the kind of thing that we want to do in those regions, so we don't have proper offices. It's mostly if you get into Ketmanswoop or Marienta, it's actually we are squatting in a house which was supposed to be a house of someone else.
Yeah.
That is true for Oshakati, that's true for Kunene and Ochiborongo. So the next steps is to ensure that we build offices in those regions as well, so that we have a full-fledged office where we have internet capability, internet space for young people to come and access it. You have a bookshop, library sort of, where again students can access those and find information that they need. So that was part of this, but also to get to know the kind of warm bodies that we have in those regions and what we are able to do with the people that we have in those regions. And obviously it dovetailed into the strategic element that we embarked upon afterwards, to ensure now that some regions that they didn't have cameras, and we have to make sure that we get them equipment to be able to do their job. So we've done that. Almost every region now has a new camera, so that we can write stories and tell the stories from our vantage. Then we use those pictures, we use the stories to ensure that we feed whether it's NBC, it's New Warehouse number, whoever's interested in the kind of work that we do. So that's really what's the purpose of that.
Yeah, but maybe just for a lay Namibian sitting down somewhere in their villages, and they want to understand the role, the strategic role that your ministry plays. What do you do as a ministry?
The key function, the mandate of the ministry is to disseminate information using information communication technologies. So that's really the primary objective. Also, we have regulatory, we set policies for the rest of the country, including public enterprises such as Telecom, MTC, NAMPOST. So we have oversight of all regulatory framework with regards to telecommunications. Other than also have oversight of state media such as NBC, New Era, and Number. So the sum total of that is that our service is primarily to disseminate information.
Okay. Let's move to since also joining the ministry, the issue of digital transformation has actually enjoyed a lot of your attention. Just take us through that. What have you done so far? Are we moving in the right direction?
Obviously, we've done a lot of work. The world where it's going now is into digitalization. A lot of functions that cannot be performed by humans will have to be converted to be done by machines using artificial intelligence. For example, when you talk about artificial intelligence, in mines, some mines they operate 24 hours. But if you're able to use artificial intelligence, some of those functions can be used by machine. In other words, a machine can operate on behalf of persons while you are sleeping, or agriculture where farming irrigation can be automated, such that the intervention of humans becomes limited. This is pure this is good for many reasons. One is that you cut down on people cost. Most companies generally they spend a lot of money on cost. They're supposed to actually to do the actual function of the mandate of that institution. So that's really where we're going. Also, with the advent of 5G now, you know that last year Cabinet approved the 5G strategic rollout plan. So Crane has been advertising for spectrum now. They'll be closing sometime around the 17th or 20th of April, towards the end of the month. But at the end of the day, the license will be issued. So how does that then change the life of a child that is sitting deep in the rural area? So what we're looking at is to see whether we can use technology to improve our education, to improve our health services through e-health and through education, tele-teaching, to the extent that if in a village there's no mathematics teacher, but there's connectivity, we can have someone from a place where they have a good mathematics teacher to actually be able to conduct lectures from a distance by using technology. So this is really where we're headed. We are working on a national digital transformation strategy. Hopefully by September we should actually have a concrete plan that Cabinet again can have a look at and approve.
Okay. Now, one of the positive developments in the last year or so is actually the passing of the Access to Information Bill and the subsequent enactment of the bill, passing it into law now. A budget has been allocated for the establishment of the Information Commissioner's Office and all this. Maybe, what does this mean for us, Namibia as a country, to actually have this access to information law a reality?
You know, this is part of government's early plan in HPP, where we're saying governance is one of the pillars that will underpin our next steps. So that will mean that any person in the country will have the right to access information that is in the possession of any institution, private or government. I think that the misconception that this is only targeted to government. Really, generally it's targeting all institutions. For example, if you want to exercise your rights, new right to say, look, I want to see what this policy says, you can demand that kind of information. Obviously, there are some exceptions. There will be privileged information such as lawyer-client information that will not be accessible. Confidential documents such as cabinet records, security information, those are out of the province of the law. It says so. But generally, it empowers Namibians to be able to use that information in the exercise of their rights. So, obviously, Namibia, as you know, on press freedom ranking, it has consistently been number one, except for the past 2 years where we were taken by Ghana and Seychelles. We're number 2 now in the respective years. So one of the reasons cited was the absence of access to information law. So now that the law is there, hopefully our rankings again will go back to where it was, perhaps even higher globally. The other part of what you said was that obviously we made appropriation for it. There's $20 million to start setting up the commission. We are at a stage where regulations have been formulated, and the process of consultation on those regulations will commence soon afterwards. Then once the consultation process has been completed, then obviously the Minister will gazette the regulations. At that point only can the process of recruitment of the Information Commissioner begin. And then the Information Commissioner himself or herself will then undertake the process of creating a structure of the institution. Then they will then determine the next steps of how that is going to proceed. That will essentially end the role of the ministry. But this is an independent body. Not to get further other than
that's where I wanted to come. Just take us through
yes.
the independence of this office once it's actually birthed and everything.
Yeah, it's fully an independent body in the mode of anti-corruption commission that they make their own decisions. They have their own accounting officers and all of that. So we only appropriated the $20 million just to assist the commission to establish itself Then going forward, they will draw up their own budget based on their plans and their ability to perform, to implement the strategic plan that they are going to design afterwards. So that's really where our role will end. Other than that, it's true it's going to be a fully independent body. It will not be falling under it doesn't fall under the Ministry of Information and Communication Technology.
Okay. Now, Edie, can you also just take us through your program for the year as the MICT? What are some of those key targets that what are you looking at?
One of the things that we are going to be doing now is to fully implement the government communication strategy as approved by Cabinet. That will mean that government as a whole will be communicating more often than not because of the programs that government is implementing. Also, you see now we're going through a process of retraining the public relations officers from the level of local authorities up to national government. So that process is concluded now. You will see later in the year that there will be frequent cabinet briefings by cabinet ministers on activities of their portfolios. Also, one of the key elements of our work is to popularize the nationhood campaign, which is really, really important. The President is always saying, you know, he's always disturbed by the emergence of tribalism, regionalism, and all of those negative isms that have the effect of taking us backwards. So that the NNP campaign is aimed at exactly that, to instill, first of all, pride as Namibians to our country, loyalty to our country, but also to recognize that our going forward, our success in going forward, depends on us working together as one unit of a country. So it's important. Then obviously we are working on a cybercrime bill and data protection bill. At the moment it's hanging in the air. You see a lot of bullies online. There's no protection, there's no recourse at the present moment. So all of that is intended to protect the rights of individuals, but also to protect the information of individuals. At the moment, the process of consultations is underway. We know what some media rights, as if this has been adopted as a policy of government. There's no document for Parliament now to approve or reject or to debate one way or another. So there's a really draft bills that are going through the process of consultations. And once we are comfortable that everyone else has been consulted, I think then we'll take those bills straight to Parliament for debate.
Maybe the nationhood program, through your consultations, I mean, you've visited various towns, you are holding workshops every now and then, but of course it's an open secret that there are those tribalism is a reality in the country. But what are some of the issues? Why do we see tribalism re-emerging, or was it ever dealt with in the first place?
You know, we were progressing very well at some point, I must say. I think this has really emerged in the recent years. But it's not to the level where we're talking about it's going to be civil war. I think we simply want to safeguard that it should not go any further, it should not go anywhere, because we've seen countries where tribalism has flamed, has bent their countries. We've seen what has happened in Rwanda, you see what happened in Burundi, where to the extent that the head of state has to be killed. So we don't want to go there. We think that we can do better as recognizing our differences, but also appreciating the commonalities among us as Namibians, which is that we're Namibians, and this is the only country most of us have. So if you're going to ban it, then obviously we have nowhere to go other than going into the sea, or we are going to perish all of us, because there's not going to be a winner. Whether the perceptions are real, it's a function of discussion, but as government we recognize that tribalism cannot take us anywhere. That's why the NNP campaign was set up, to ensure that there's broad and general understanding of the effects of negativisms within the country.
Yeah, maybe one of the suggestions by the nationhood program is that school kids should, in every morning during their assemblies, also just pledge allegiance to the national flag and all these other things. Maybe can you clarify what the idea behind that?
Yes, there are 12 pillars that underlines the NNP strategy. There are various stakeholders under each pillar. One of those is a pledge of loyalty in schools, which is being jointly spearheaded by the Minister of Justice and the Minister of Education, Arts and Culture. The Minister of Justice essentially to draw up a pledge that school kids will be able to recite in schools. But this is not uncommon. This is essentially what happens in America. The members of Congress, each time they start with the pledge of loyalty to the country. This is members of Congress. So we want to build that loyalty
From a
very young age.
grassroots.
Yes, so that people grow up knowing that our common base is Namibia and it cannot be destroyed by any negative isms.
Okay. Yeah, maybe over the past year, shortcomings here and there, what were some of your major challenges?
Obviously,
As a ministry? Or perhaps because you also speak on behalf of government, so maybe you can also just touch base wherever you've picked up issues here and there.
I think obviously the last 3 years has been very challenging because of COVID, also because of the economic downturn that the world has faced generally. So to the extent that our revenues has shrunk, that also curtailed our ability to be able to implement the programs that we had planned to do. As a result, some of the programs were not implemented. You look at the youth unemployment rate, that stands at about 44, 45%, depending who you listen to. It's quite high. And government has done different programs to ensure that we curtail that. For example, the Minister of Youth National Service, they have a program where they absorb young people at the Rietfontein Center outside Rietfontein, really to give them skills that they can work for themselves. Also, if you look at the Minister of Gender, there are programs that are geared towards young people. The Minister of Trade offers assistance to young people in business. There's an organization called Youth in Agriculture. Young people really will grow them together and say, we are interested in farming. We may not have the degrees that some of you have, but we're able to use our hands to be able to make a living. So government is conscious of that. In the current bill, I think it's about $33 billion. It's $33 billion that is set aside, allocated to different ministries, specifically to do with youth problems, whether it's to build social cohesion through the Ministry of Gender, sexual and health, social and reproductive health, programs with, that I mentioned through the Ministry of Youth, but also, again, directly, if you look at the Ministry of Education, the amount of money that's being absorbed, that's being pumped into education to ensure that kids that must be able to go to school. Then obviously you have also money being pumped into the student bursary scheme, where again young people are encouraged to apply. Obviously this is not enough. The cake is not as big as government would like to have it, but this is the resource that we have now. We hope that in the future it can improve. So that's really the issue, some of the challenges that we're dealing with.
I know we are going for a short break. We will be right back. Welcome back to On the Spot. We are still with Dr. Audrin Mathe, the MICT ED. Now, Dr. Mathe, we saw during the current financial year the budgetary allocation to public media houses such as New Era, the Namibia Press Agency, and the NBC. We saw an increase. Perhaps what informed, during your budgetary allocation as a ministry, what informed your decision to say, okay, no, let's improve funding these institutions?
You know, I worked at NBC before, I worked here at New Era. I just didn't work at Nampa. So I have a good appreciation of the challenges that public media experience, especially with the lack of resources. So we had met, I had asked the three CEOs to meet so that we can appreciate the challenges that the corporations are faced with. So obviously, my own experience of where the corporations stand, we then had to confirm some of the things that we thought were a priority, including the equipment. Obviously, NAPC, part of the resolution was that they received a donation from TIGA, but then we still needed to augment that. Even vehicles, the corporation does not have enough vehicles that we would like to have. We can't move freely even when windows. So we said, why don't you set aside some money? We can do that. The same with NBC. NBC overhead is quite high, but also the nature of the corporation itself, it's kind of high intensive to the extent that there's a lot of investment that is required. What they will need on average will be $500 million, but we can only give them 300 plus in aid of the functions that they do. If you look at the press agency, most press agencies in the world, they have closed down, including the South African press agency next door here, because they've not been profitable generally, and there's no way that the number would be expected to be profitable in the current manner in which they operate now. So we then approached the Ministry of Finance to be very understanding of the nature of our problems, and then they did augment us to be able to assist those corporations to receive a bit of a small injection, with the idea that then your functions, your mandate can speak to where generally government is driving the rest of the country in terms of development, but also communicating information out of government, but also from the constituencies to government.
Yeah, and maybe before I get to my next question, as government, are you satisfied? Do you see value for money when you give money to New Era, when you give money to Nampa, when you give money to the NBC? Do you see value for money in their services?
There's been a debate in Parliament, you will know, just 2 weeks ago when the minister was motivating. Obviously, there's some concerns on whether New Era is implementing the mandate that it was, which is to report on developmental issues of national interest. In many cases, you see stories that will not be relevant to the mandate, where New Era at the same time is becoming critical of government. And I think that is not being received very well. I've communicated that view to the colleagues here at New Era, that there's a reason why New Era was created. And that's not for government to create an institution that criticizes it, but it's really communicating information on developmental issues. But you have developed now into a space where you are seen to be competing with other private papers for whatever reason. So we will continue to insist that there is a reason why New Era was established, and those reasons are clearly in the Act. The editors, the leadership, the CEO, management should be aware and conscious of why the corporation was created. We don't want to be operating in a space where there's litigation every day because New Era has reported on this. That's true for NBC, that they were created specifically for the purpose. That's true for Nampa, that there was a reason for their creation, but not become to be an extended arm of the opposition, critical of government. It's not an NGO, it's not an advocacy body. It's really there to report on government activities in an objective manner. And when I say that, we don't mean that you should be praising us, but of course if you are doing a good job, then the praise is due. But it's not that you should be praise singing, but really to go on the ground. What it is that people want to know, what is happening on the ground, what has government done? So those stories need to come out very strongly. Yes.
No, Dr. Mathe, I get you. But let's talk about the New Era, for instance. And when you have a government institution like the University of the Namibia University of Science and Technology, where government pumps in billions of public money, of course, and there are those. What's currently happening at the institution speaks to lack of good governance. So, where does that then place New Era in this equation? Should New Era then turn a blind eye and say no, this is not developmental, but we should rather stick to the borehole the 600 boreholes that were constructed? Where do you strike the balance actually? Yeah, maybe just explain just for clarity. Yeah.
I don't know the specific case that you're referring to.
Yeah.
If you're talking about something in today's papers, I've not read the papers
Okay,
yet, as we engage now. But I can speak about something that
maybe accountability
New Era has done. For example, you'll find a story to say that you yourself have written, where you see, but where is the rationale of this? You seem to put your own opinions in a story, where you imply something that there's elements of tribalism. Obviously, we know what happened. As I said, I'm from this space. I know that journalists, they can also be used, but they can be given information. And there's a reason why someone gives information. They want to get their side of the story out. And that story, that vision, may not be the only truth. So you see stories that are littered with a lot of opinions, with a lot of untruth that even in an average reader can say, but where does this come? I had an example where a colleague of mine sent me a question that came from New Era to say, is there a reason why you're not giving money to Karara? Is it because it's held by opposition? This is from a New Era journalist. But where do you get those views? So obviously someone told that journalist to say, they're not giving us money because of this. So then dilutes how the questions are framed and how stories are framed. This is what we're talking about. There's no suggestion at all that if a clinic has been built there, then it is in operation for 5 years. You can't write a story to say, government, why is this clinic built 5 years ago, but there are no people to operate it? That's not what I say. Tell us that. Maybe someone doesn't know that there's a clinic in it. But where personally I have a view is to say where the New Era or NBC takes upon itself to become a critical opposition to government, contrary to the mandate which is in there. We already have enough, unless you are assuming that the opposition are doing a terrible job, therefore we need to occupy that space. But then let's be clear whether that's where you want to play, so people can treat you that.
I get what you're saying,
Yeah.
because what you are basically saying is the institutions must always remember why they were created.
Absolutely.
Yeah, they must not deviate from their mandate.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Now, moving away from that question, is the question of the merger that was proposed between the New Era and NAMPA. There was a consultant, I think, that was hired. How far is this process? Is it still going to happen, or is it something of the past?
I have no idea whether there was a consultant, but obviously I'm aware of the fact that the cabinet had resolved that the two institutions be merged, and I have not had sight of any paperwork that was done to consolidate that decision. But obviously, sometime last year, the Minister of ICT, Dr. Mshirang, and I, together with the Deputy Minister, we spoke about that resolution and its intended effect. Obviously, consultations are underway at the moment. As things progress, we'll be able to say something if there's something that will be required of us to say.
Okay. Yeah, maybe from where you stand again, you mentioned that we've enjoyed as a country really high ranking in terms of press freedom. But generally, of course, what is the general state of the media in the country, private and public?
I think from a freeness perspective, Namibia has been very consistent. From the very beginning, we have, when these rankings, when we first included, we were at number 4. But since then, we have moved to number 1. And for the last 2 years, we've been number 2. So that explains the freeness of the press in the country, and the government's reluctance to interfere in what the media does. contrary to what you see in other countries where journalists find themselves in and out of court because they've been sued by government for this, or their licenses have been revoked. Nothing of that sort has happened in Namibia. We are ranked a lot higher than, for example, the United States, the United Kingdom, when it comes to freeness of the press. I think we should be proud of that. We are in the top 20 globally, so not just in Africa, when about in Africa, we're actually 20, in the top, I think we're 17th globally. I think that's an honor for us. You know, the World Press Freedom Day was birthed in our country. That speaks something about us as a people. But then the press freedom therefore should not be abused, though, to the extent that you see a lot of unhappiness among our country. Yesterday, you see headlines, but then when you read the wood, the body, then you don't see what the headlines speak to. There's a lot of sensationalism which has really no foundation in journalism. I think that's very concerning. Very recently, there was a story in one of the papers to say the vice president said youth will not lead this country. Completely out of context. I think this is what is me, that we seem to be taking these things for granted, to generate a sensation when they shouldn't be sensation at all. It's a straightforward matter. Report the facts as they are. If you want to have an opinion, write a column so we know where you stand on issues, than to hide behind the stories.
Okay. Now maybe when one looks at, of course, you said earlier that you visited your studios, the regional offices and all that. Sometimes there appears to be some overlapping functions between the ministry and, or are they, between the ministry and perhaps institutions like the New Era, or do they complement each other? What can you just clarify that?
There's a lot of complementarity, actually. Again, I had consultations with the three CEOs of public media. We discussed how we were going to be cooperating. The ministry has representation in all 14 regions. None of the three corporations has that level of representation. So what we were saying was that we have information officers. They can generate stories for you. We have cameras, video camera, we have still photograph. We can take pictures, write stories for you, for your use, whether it's for NBC, for NABC, or number. Also, what we've done is that where we are present, and any of these institutions is present, then we say, why don't you come and live with us? Come and have your houses, your offices in our building, so that you don't have to pay electricity, you don't have to pay water, you don't have to pay for rent. So the ministry actually caters that. That arrangement is stay in Omaheke, NBC studios. They're broadcasting from Omaheke. The news team is also based there. If you get to Kitmaswap, a New Era is residing in NBC offices. If you get to Umsia, we had a representation of New Era in Umsia, but when the representation is no longer there. So this is the level of collaboration that we're working with. So when you see stories, you see stories sometimes in New Era that are written by information officers. You see stories on NBC that were captured by video by our teams in those respective regions. That's really the level of collaboration. If anything else, really, there's been a lot of us working together to ensure that, first of all, we cut down on costs that are unnecessary, but secondly, we create teams that speak to each other. So, for example, you don't send 4 vehicles to Chumkwe because New Era wants to go, Nampa wants to go, NBC wants to go, the minister also wants to go. So we say, let's divide the 4 teams instead to different stories, so that we split the resources to be able to cover more than one team, the same teams going to the same event, then others end up not being able to be covered. Look at Ochizonjupa, it's very, very, very huge region. If you are traveling from Okahanja to go to Chumkwe, you will probably be driving over 400 plus kilometers to get there. So it's almost impossible for New Era to be able to cover Ochizonjupa alone if multiple events take place at the same time. That's why we're saying, let's collaborate. We can share vehicles, we can loop in cars together if we need to go to a particular event. So, for example, we have cameras, video cameras. at events when NBC requires our camera or microphones, we avail those equipment to them. And if New Era will require the same resources that we have PA systems, those things are available for use by corporations. And I think that's a smart way of doing. Again, it reduces cost. It's also a smart partnership.
Okay. Yeah, now I want to talk about government's PR machinery. And I'm not sure whether you followed. I think during the cabinet opening, the president was speaking of, I think he was being critical of the ministers and sometimes ministries, saying when a ministry is criticized, when a ministry is in the media for the wrong reasons, you are nowhere to be seen to defend and to say, this is what we are doing, this is our mandate, to tell your story from your vantage point as government. And that's one of the challenges that we as journalists also have been experiencing with senior government officials, ministers and all these things. They are hardly accessible. So sometimes you are left to do a story from one side and say the minister could not be reached. But that's as far as you can go. Some government PROs, for a lack of a better word, I would say some of them are incompetent, if I may say, or maybe they are just reluctant to share information. I don't know what the correct word is. Maybe it's something that you've picked up, but generally, I think with the exception of some ministries, of course, like MICT, what is it, justice, for instance, education, agriculture, which is very accessible and quite vibrant, and yeah. So generally, what is the state and what are you doing as a ministry also just to arm the communication departments within those ministries with the necessary tools and skills just to ensure that they communicate effectively? Yeah,
you know, the perception sometimes they can be rooted in facts. Our PR also say that there seems to be a lot of incompetencies among journalists, that a simple story that is straightforward, you completely get it wrong. That's why you see corrections almost every day. So that's the view. So when you point one finger at another person, the other three fingers are pointing at you. But what the president was saying is was that we have to go out and communicate more. He has directed ministers to be available. The president on record has even said that. He has directed the ministers to become more responsive. As a result, what you'll see in the next coming weeks is that there will be daily briefings by ministers arranged in clusters where they explain what government is doing on a continuous basis. So there will be daily media briefings going forward. So it will remove any doubt that government is being responsive enough or that we're not willing to answer questions, because the ministers will be there themselves. They will take questions as they are posed and explain what their portfolios, what their ministries are doing. So at the level of public relations officers, as I mentioned earlier on, we have undergone a training session. We had one training session in Sporongo, another in Oshakati, where we brought together all PROs of offices, ministries, agencies, regional councils and local authorities in one room, really to re-induct them in the business of communicating. We have also made sure that there is understanding from those owners to get the PROs required gadgets to be able to communicate much more effectively. I think that is showing signs of improvement already. I don't receive a lot of complaints that this ministry is not respond to any queries, and I know that most colleagues in the media, they call me when they get difficulties getting through another ministry, and we assist to ensure that they get the responses that they require. I've already explained this to management of New Era, NBC or NAMPA, to say if there are difficulties of getting hold of anyone in government, they should need to let us know so we can assist to facilitate that communication.
Yeah, maybe before we conclude, my last question really is on your vision for the ministry. a strategic vision for the institution that you lead on a daily basis, and perhaps broadly, maybe for the three government-owned media houses?
You know, I don't have a vision on my own. The head of the ministry is the Minister of ICT, Dr. Mshilenga, who is very, very engaged in the process. We have developed a blueprint now for the next 2 years until 2025, where we lay out what's going to happen, including digital transformation that we discussed earlier, but also how best to structure public enterprises so that there's less dependency on the state for their funding. This weekend, next week already, we have strategic retreats to ensure that there's broad understanding of everyone else in the ministry of how that's going to be carried out. So there's an enormous task that is going to be done. The idea is, our focus is to ensure that one, government communicates much more effectively. Information is disseminated through public engagement, through the programs that we run in the communities, showing of videos, producing documentaries, writing stories from the community, so that mirrors what is happening in there. At the same time, we don't want to lose sight of the fact that the world is changing, technology is changing. We want to make sure that Namibia is not left behind with regards to harnessing the advantages of 5G connectivity, of digitalization, to ensure that our country develops. We talk about the digital economy. What does that mean for average person? How are we able to do business without being present in a particular area? How do we communicate with the rest of the world to ensure that they understand what Namibia is able to offer from a tourism perspective, from a business perspective, so that then our economic growth is not only seen from within, but also has an external outlook for the global community to have an appreciation of what Namibia offers. You have seen discoveries now in oil. You have seen discoveries in green hydrogen. So we must be ready to ensure that we are best structured to ensure that we communicate all of these stories about government, about our successes, but also to acknowledge what's to be done to ensure things get better. I think that's where the minister and deputy minister they are focused on as we speak. And these conversations will be ongoing. We will be consulting anyone that is willing to listen, so that we have a common understanding of where the ministry is headed into, so that at the end of the day, all of us are able to say, you know, what is happening in there, I was part of that conversation, and I'm happy it is born a success, and we can move forward.
Dr. Mathe, thank you for honoring our invite.
Thanks so much.
Thank you so much. All the best. This brings us to the end of our on-the-spot edition. Until we see each other next time. Goodbye. You're done.
Okay.
Yeah.